In a quiet, rural village in India, a mother once reported her baby missing. The police arrived shortly after, but it was a young boy, smiling, who came forward and offered to lead them to the child. What they found wasn't a rescue, but a body. And this isn't some horror movie. This is a true account. It's the haunting story of Amarjeet Sada, a boy who, by the time he was just 8 years old, had already taken the lives of 3 children. Born into extreme poverty, raised in near isolation, and driven by urges no one, not even his own family, could comprehend, Amarjeet would go on to earn the title of the youngest known serial killer in history. But this story, it's only the beginning. Because in this video, we're diving into 3 of the most disturbing cases of child murderers from around the world. We're talking about killers from remote villages, suburban neighborhoods, and even the outskirts of Europe's major cities, all of them children. Children who committed unthinkable crimes without a shred of remorse, and whose victims were often babies or toddlers. Trigger warning: this story involves child victims and child perpetrators. So if that's something you're sensitive to, consider this your heads up. But if you're like me, fascinated by the dark corners of the human mind, true crime, cults, conspiracies, and all things disturbingly real, you're in the right place. And today, we're diving headfirst into some of the most twisted stories the world has ever seen. So buckle up. We're going full speed into these grim tales, starting with Amarjeet Sada. Long before Amarjeet Sada's name made headlines, before anyone suspected him of murder, he was simply another child born into one of India's most overlooked corners. He came into the world in 1998, in a small rural area called Musahari in Bihar, a place riddled with poverty, minimal infrastructure, and virtually no access to modern healthcare, especially mental health services. In places like Musahari, science often takes a back seat to superstition, and mental illness isn't treated. It's feared, dismissed, or blamed on spirits. Families struggling with psychological issues rarely seek help, not because they don't care, but because they don't understand what help even looks like. Shame and cultural stigma keep everything buried. Amarjeet's neighborhood was packed tightly with families living in mud brick homes, narrow alleyways, and open drains. His parents worked as day laborers, earning barely enough to keep food on the table. But in this environment, more dangerous than poverty itself was the silence. A silence around emotional and behavioral issues. Kids with clear warning signs weren't seen as needing help. They were just labeled as difficult, cursed, or strange. And Amarjeet? He was definitely different. Other children avoided him. He didn't play with kids his age, and when he did, his interactions were sometimes explosive. He'd lash out unexpectedly, startling even the older kids. While others splashed in ponds or played games, he sat alone, withdrawn. Villagers would later recall him being quiet but odd, polite at times, but deeply unnerving. Even his mother noticed something wasn't right. He had a temper that she couldn't explain, a simmering rage beneath the surface. But instead of doctors, she turned to tradition. She rubbed kohl, kajal, beneath his eyes to protect him from evil, and tied a Hanuman talisman to his wrist. She believed he was being haunted by spirits, not driven by something psychological. And it's hard to blame her. She had no education, no access to mental health services, and no real options. And yet, these rituals couldn't stop what was festering inside Amarjeet. At first glance, Amarjeet was just another boy lost in the shuffle of rural life. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was brewing. His behavior began to grow darker, more erratic, and then one day, tragedy struck. His first known victim was someone painfully close, his infant cousin. The child's death was sudden and suspicious, but the family made a choice, a devastating one. They covered it up. Whether it was out of denial, fear, or shame, they called it an accident. They protected Amarjeet, even though they knew the truth. And by shielding him from consequences, they allowed something inside him to grow unchecked, something monstrous. Not long after, he would take another life. This time, it was his own baby sister, just 8 months old. Amarjeet strangled her with his bare hands. The signs couldn't have been more horrifying, and yet again, the family stayed quiet. No police, no report, just another buried truth. Whether out of disbelief or cultural pressure, they chose silence over justice. But that silence wouldn't last much longer. In 2007, the village would be shaken to its core. A 6-month-old girl named Khushbu, the daughter of a neighbor, suddenly disappeared. Her mother had left her sleeping in a local school for just a few minutes. When she returned, the child was gone. The entire community began searching, panic rising. And that's when Amarjeet did something unthinkable. He stepped forward, smiling, and confessed. He told the police where to look. They didn't believe him at first. After all, he was 8 years old, just a kid. Maybe it was a joke or a cry for attention, but it wasn't. He led officers to a shallow grave. There, they uncovered the tiny body of Khushbu. She had been beaten with a brick and strangled. When questioned, Amarjeet was eerily calm. He smiled throughout the confession. According to reports, he even asked the officers for biscuits before explaining what he had done. He described the murder without emotion, no shame, no regret, just pure, calculated detachment. Faced with such a shocking confession, investigators were left stunned. Here was a child, barely over 3 feet tall, recounting a triple homicide like it was nothing. Forensic psychologists were brought in, and their conclusion was chilling. Amarjeet Sada showed clear signs of sadistic behavior. He didn't just commit murder, he derived pleasure from it. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a child copying something he saw. It was the mind of a born predator. But here's where things take an even darker turn. The law had no way to deal with him. In 2007, under India's Juvenile Justice Act, anyone under 18 could not be tried as an adult. That meant no criminal trial, no prison time, and no possibility of a life sentence. The most the law could do? 10 years in a juvenile facility. So that's exactly what happened. Amarjeet was sent to a juvenile home, the only legal option available. Behind those walls, he reportedly received therapy, counseling, and education. But almost nothing is known about what truly happened during those years. There were no updates, no interviews, no transparency. His case slowly vanished from headlines. And then, in 2016, he turned 18. Under Indian law, once a juvenile offender turns of age, their criminal record is sealed. Their identity is protected. And they are, in the eyes of the law, given a clean slate. To this day, no one knows where Amarjeet Sada is. Some believe he was relocated under government protection. Others think he's been quietly reintegrated into society under a new name. One thing is certain. The youngest known serial killer in modern history is free and untraceable. So that leaves us with the terrifying question: can someone who killed 3 children before they learned to write truly leave that part of themselves behind? Let me tell you another story. Before the headlines, before the trial, before the world tried to wrap its head around a 12-year-old committing mass murder, Jasmine Richardson was just a regular girl growing up in suburban Medicine Hat, Alberta. Born in 1993, Jasmine lived what most would consider a typical middle-class life. Her parents, Mark and Deborah, had met while overcoming personal struggles with substance abuse. Determined to give their children a better future, they worked hard, stayed clean, and built a home rooted in love and second chances. Jasmine was their firstborn. 5 years later, they had a son, Jacob. Together, the family was known to be tight-knit. Jasmine excelled in school, participated in the arts, and had a good circle of friends. She wasn't isolated, she wasn't neglected. By all appearances, her life was normal, until it wasn't. Around the age of 11, something began to shift. Jasmine started gravitating toward the goth subculture. Not inherently dangerous, of course. But in her case, it marked a dramatic transformation. Heavy eyeliner, dark clothes, edgy online forums, and social media profiles that painted her as older than she was. Her digital persona on sites like Vampire Freaks and MySpace portrayed her as a teenager, sometimes even claiming she was 15 or 16. And that's where she met someone who would change everything: Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy Steinke wasn't just older. He was 23 years old when he met Jasmine online. And yet, he was immediately drawn to her. On his social media profiles, Jeremy styled himself as a 300-year-old werewolf, wore a vial of blood around his neck, and immersed himself in dark fantasy, horror, and violent music. Where Jasmine was dipping her toes into rebellion, Jeremy was already submerged in a fantasy world with no boundaries. Despite their 11-year age difference, they began a secret relationship. Jasmine lied about her age. Jeremy didn't care. In fact, some reports suggest he was excited by how young she really was. What started as edgy flirtation turned into something far more dangerous: a warped love story steeped in obsession, violence, and delusion. Her parents found out and were horrified. They demanded she end it. They took away her computer access, grounded her, tried to regain control. But it was too late. Jasmine and Jeremy had already made a deadly pact. Inspired by movies like Natural Born Killers, they fantasized about a life where they could be together, free of rules, free of her family. And to make that happen, they decided they would eliminate anyone who stood in their way. That included her mom, dad, and little brother. It was April 23rd, 2006, a quiet Sunday in Medicine Hat. But inside the Richardson home, the silence would soon be shattered forever. That night, Jeremy Steinke snuck into the house. Jasmine let him in. First, they went to the basement, where her parents were relaxing. Jeremy attacked Mark Richardson, stabbing him repeatedly. The struggle was brutal. Mark fought back, but Jeremy had the advantage. He overpowered him, stabbing him over 20 times. Deborah was next. She screamed, she begged, but Jeremy showed no mercy. And then came the most horrifying part. 8-year-old Jacob, Jasmine's little brother, had heard the noise. He ran to hide, but was found by Jasmine. And it was Jasmine who would deliver the final blow. She later admitted it was her decision. She said she didn't want to leave him alone in the world after killing their parents. In the end, the entire Richardson family, except Jasmine, was dead. The next morning, a neighbor noticed something strange. Curtains drawn, no signs of life. Concerned, they called the police. Officers arrived, entered the home, and found the bodies. What they didn't find was Jasmine. At first, they thought she'd been kidnapped, but it didn't take long to uncover the truth. Within 24 hours, Jasmine and Jeremy were found hiding out in a nearby town, laughing, kissing, celebrating what they had done. They weren't running. They thought they'd won. The nation was stunned. A 12-year-old girl and her 23-year-old boyfriend had just murdered her entire family, not in a fit of rage, not under duress, but with deliberate planning. And yet, when it came time for justice, things got complicated. Under Canadian law, no one under the age of 14 could be tried as an adult. That meant Jasmine couldn't receive a life sentence, no matter how brutal her crimes were. In 2007, Jasmine Richardson was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Her sentence? The maximum allowed, 10 years. That included time in a psychiatric facility, followed by conditional supervision in the community. Jeremy, on the other hand, was tried as an adult. He was convicted of the same crimes and sentenced to 3 life sentences to be served concurrently. In court, he showed no remorse. At one point, he even declared that he and Jasmine were soulmates, bound by love and blood. But the most chilling twist? Jasmine was released in 2016, completely free. By that time, she was 23 years old, the same age Jeremy was when he helped her murder her family. The courts deemed her rehabilitated. Her name was changed, her records sealed, and she was allowed to walk back into the world with a clean slate. She's out there now, living anonymously, blending into society. Amarjeet Sada, Jasmine Richardson, 2 children, 2 killers, whose names will forever be tied to some of the most chilling crimes committed by juveniles. But what happens when children kill? How do we reconcile the innocence we associate with childhood and the psychopathic behavior that some of these kids exhibit? Is it something they are born with, or is it the product of their environment? In both cases, the law was unable to provide a satisfactory answer. Amarjeet, despite his horrific acts, was granted a chance to reform in a juvenile detention center with no long-term consequences to his actions. Jasmine was eventually released into society with a clean slate, having served only 10 years for killing her family. But we're left with an unsettling reality. These children, who committed atrocities before they even hit their teens, are now free to blend into society. Where are they now? What happens when the world forgets that they were once killers? No matter how much time passes or how many attempts at rehabilitation are made, can the darkness they harbored ever truly be erased? And as they walk among us, are we truly safe from their pasts? Or have we simply chosen to forget? The chilling truth is that we may never know the full extent of their futures. But one thing is certain. These are stories that will haunt us forever. So, this was today's true crime case. Do you think justice was really served in this case? Or is the story still unfinished? Don't forget to share your opinion in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next crime story. Till then, stay safe and stay curious. Thanks for watching.